Hello everyone, my name is Hannah Yakub. I'm a science fiction fan and a student here at UCI. If this is your first time joining me, welcome to the podcast Trek Takes, where we take apart episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation and delve deeper into the social issues addressed in each episode. The episode we'll be looking at today is called The Outcast. Joining me on today's podcast is a science fiction lover and Star Trek superfan. She also happens to be my mom, Debbie McKinley.
Hi, Hannah. I'm really happy to be here. I love Star Trek, and I'm looking forward to addressing today's episode. The Star Trek franchise is usually really good at addressing societal issues and bringing them to the forefront. Should we start with a rundown of the episode?
Yeah, of course. Today's episode comes from Season 5. It's episode 17 of the series, and it's called The Outcast. In this episode, we start off with an introduction of the Janai, a genderless race of humanoid aliens. The Janai seek out the help of the USS Enterprise in an attempt to track down their missing shuttle, but the USS Enterprise encounters a problem as they are unable to track down the ship right away. It is revealed that the missing shuttle may have disappeared into an irregular pocket of space, an anomaly referred to as null space. Commander Riker is then paired up with Soren, a member of the Janai species, and tasked with mapping the null space in an attempt to locate the missing shuttle. During their efforts, the two discuss the fundamental differences between each other's gendered and genderless societies. Commander Riker and Soren ultimately form a very close bond with one another as they learn more and more about one another. Soren confides in Riker by admitting that, despite her species' non-gendered nature, she identifies as a female. She also reveals to Commander Riker that she has feelings for him. Commander Riker admits that he also has feelings for her as well. Krite, another member of the Janai species that was aboard the USS Enterprise at the time, learns of their relationship and reports them to the Janai authorities. This leads to Soren being forced to undergo conversion therapy in order to bring her back to the Janai societal standards of being genderless. After undergoing conversion therapy, Soren no longer identifies as female and no longer regards having feelings for Riker. Alright, so that was the rundown of today's episode. The primary societal issue that was addressed in this particular episode was gender. Was that what you gathered from this episode as well?
Yes, definitely. The episode really drove home the subject matter of gender. Multiple characters engaged in conversations about gender and the so-called differences that exist between them. Soren had identified as female before coming to the USS Enterprise, and even discussed how Janai who identify as male or female get together in private settings. On the USS Enterprise, Soren tries to get a better idea of how males and females of the human race differ, whether it be physical differences or emotional differences. It seemed that consistently throughout the episode, there were clear-cut comparisons drawn between the two societies.
I did notice that the show creators were very clear about drawing those comparisons between the two societies, and these comparisons appear to be made to reflect back on our own society. The differences between a genderless and a gendered society were explicitly stated multiple times throughout the episode, and physically represented as well. Soren mentions to Riker that disagreements based on gender would never occur on the Janai planet. In our society, and the mirrored human society on Star Trek The Next Generation, there would undoubtedly be disputes based upon gender, especially in our own society, where we see the gender division of labor and inequality among males and females in the workplace. There are ongoing conversations about how women are not valued or recognized for their contributions to society, but these conversations would never need to occur on a genderless planet such as the Janai planet.
I agree. There would be no inequality among men or women on the Janai planet, as they don't allow for this type of division to occur in their society. They strictly enforce the genderless nature of their society.
In terms of the more physical representations of gender in this episode, I noticed how stylistic choices were used to make the Janai and the USS Enterprise crew differ based on gender identity. The outfit choices for the Janai people were very uniform in style and differed only in color. They also all sported the same haircut and all had the same hair color. Uniformity was being portrayed through the members of the Janai society. In comparison, the humans on the Enterprise all wear different hairstyles of varying shades. No two people have the exact same hair. The crew also appears to have similar uniforms, except for Deanna Troy's uniform. She's given a V-neck top and is made to differ from the rest of the crew. This was not at all seen among the Janai. Style-wise, there was not one person that was made to differ from the rest.
Yes, I did notice the interesting style choices. I definitely remember the Janai haircut.
How could you forget it? It was so interesting.
It was a very interesting choice they made. I also want to bring up the dinner conversation that took place between Soren and Riker. The dialogue between Soren and Riker illuminated the societal differences between the two. The two found one another's society to be slightly confusing. Riker found the Janai to be confusing because of the lack of gender. Soren found the concept of division through male and female to be quite strange. They discussed the scenario of dancing and who leads on the Janai planet, because in our society it's typical for men to lead. Soren responded that the taller person leads. Rather than relying on gender to guide their society, they rely on minute differences that aren't defined by gender.
I'm glad you brought up the men leading while dancing conversation. I did notice how during various parts of the episode, the creators of the show enforced certain gender stereotypes as well. The physical differences between males and females were broken down into hair, makeup, and nail polish. Soren, when talking to Dr. Crusher, points out all of these superficial differences. Soren automatically assumes that women put in these extra efforts in order to attract males, but Dr. Crusher asserts that while women do tend to put in extra effort for makeup, hair, and nails, men, while they don't like to admit it, also put in the effort to look good for females. Through this conversation, Dr. Crusher still clarifies to Soren that women and men are still viewed as equal, but does enforce the idea of these so-called physical differences.
Yeah. One thing that I noticed in this episode was misogynistic comments made during a card game. Worf states, "That is a woman's game. All these wild cards support a weak hand." It implies that women are weak and need help. I think it was a way to ensure that all conversations in this episode were based on gender, as it was commentary between the characters that wasn't really necessary to further the plot.
That was a good impression of Worf's voice. I also see how it furthers the differences between the androgynous Janai society and a gendered society. The discourse on gender would not usually take place in Janai society, as it isn't relevant in their day-to-day life. There wouldn't be any snide comments about women being weak in their day-to-day conversations.
Oh yes, definitely, in a way in which the producers of the show wanted to instill within the viewer the differences between the Janai society and our own. A world in which discourse on gender does not exist. But how well do you think they challenged our view on gender in our society?
Specifically, this episode, while being an episode that is made to confront our society's view on gender, in a way does play it safe by sticking to certain gender norms.
I noticed that as well. There were some safer choices that the show creators stuck with. An example of this would have been the actress that was chosen to play Soren. The actress is a woman and her character is female identifying. This allowed for the relationship between Riker and Soren to be comfortably heteronormative.
Definitely. This episode did not really delve deep into topics of sexuality. It shied away from that and stuck to a more heteronormative narrative.
Well, while this episode did adhere to the standard in some ways, it did tackle a rather difficult topic of trending interest in the science fiction realm, that of challenging certain societal and gender norms. The inclusion of a genderless race was revolutionary for the show and was designed to challenge our own gendered society. During the 1960s to the 1980s, which is the time from the creation of Star Trek world to the time of the episode we're discussing today, science fiction creators did seek to expand their horizons by tackling challenging societal issues and topics such as gender.
I'd like to expand on science fiction creators and how they tackled societal topics such as gender. During the 1960s to the 1980s, there were revolutionary female writers in the science fiction genre, such as Ursula K. Le Guin and Octavia E. Butler, that utilized the genre to challenge the status quo. They created novel stories that directly challenged not only gender norms, but heteronormativity as well.
I'm actually glad you mentioned them. Stories such as 9 Lives by Le Guin and Bloodchild by Butler utilize their characters in a way that directly challenges dominant ideologies about gender and sexuality.
Yes, definitely. 9 Lives had hinted at a relationship between 2 male lead characters, something that was very uncommon and almost unheard of during the 1960s to 80s. Bloodchild had challenged our own societal roles that we place on men and women by placing men into the position of childbearing. It's science fiction stories like these that directly challenge the status quo.
Why would it be the case that stories from Ursula K. Le Guin and Octavia E. Butler directly challenge heteronormativity and the gender norms, but series like Star Trek: The Next Generation stick to the standard as much as possible?
I think we do have to keep in mind that the creator of this specific episode is a male, Robert Scheer, who belongs to a larger production studio, that being Paramount. His perspective and creative direction would differ greatly from that of a revolutionary female science fiction writer. While Scheer does a great job of portraying a novel genderless society, his representation in terms of sexuality would be more heteronormative, as he does have to concern himself with aligning with the beliefs of a large production studio that, at the time, was headed by a male as well. Writers such as Le Guin and Butler have more freedom to write from their own unique female perspectives.
That definitely does help to explain the relationship between Soren and Riker and how it was made to be comfortably heteronormative. I still do appreciate them tackling the topic of gender and how it made me reflect on our own society. A great choice on their part.
I agree. The unique Janai race made for a very interesting episode, provided us with an episode in which they covered that difficult topic of gender and how our society greatly differs from that of a genderless society. It's about time for us to wrap up the podcast today. Do you have any closing remarks?
Yeah, I think the one thing that I found disappointing was the successful conversion therapy at the end. I think I was hoping for it to end with Soren able to be Soren.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that it was added as a way to draw comparisons within our own society, but it was a little counterintuitive to make the conversion therapy successful in the end. Also, I think it was a way for them to put an end to Soren's character as to not make her a new member of the crew.
I think they just didn't want that hairstyle staying around.
Oh my. Well, that's all for today. Thank you all for joining us. We hope to see you on next week's podcast where we will cover the episode The Measure of a Man.